Welcome as we broadcast live from SEC Media Days, the unofficial kickoff to the football season. Super excited to visit with our next guest. He's kind of somebody, SEC Commissioner Greg Sankey. Commissioner, how are you, sir?
Oh, well, thank you. I've talked a lot, but I'm doing fine.
I know you'll be at the end of the day. You'll hate to hear yourself talk. That's what I hate. I'm quiet.
We're on day 3, and I go quiet at night after each of these days.
Well, if you want to, it was about this time last year that the Texas and Oklahoma news broke. If you want to drop something like that on our show, go ahead.
No, I survived that one. So I said at the beginning of the day when I took the podium to introduce the first coach, I said, my goal is not to make any news today. So far, so good, but there's a few hours to go.
Yeah, we got a 24-hour news cycle.
Yeah.
I can't imagine being in your position right now. I think you've done a fantastic job of leading the SEC, and I'm not just saying that because you're sitting here. I think you have. But you're in this position that theoretically you could exert more power. You could do more and be more aggressive. But you also care about the sanctity of the game. Just from a day-to-day business perspective, how do you weigh that?
That's really a fascinating question, and there's a depth to it that I'll probably tonight think, oh, I should have said this and should have said that. So there's a growth reality. I was a small conference commissioner before, which was great to be at the end of the hallway and be accountable for decisions in an organization, but to be, if you will, off Broadway so that my errors weren't like headlines. And then the opportunity to work in the SEC and learn a bit, but until you're in the chair, you don't appreciate what it's like to sit in the chair. And so now I'm in my 8th year, gone through any number of challenges, and hopefully I've grown as I've gone. And certainly the COVID shutdown, the summer, the return to play in 2020, and then trying to make it through the season in football, and not to mention every other sport, was a growth opportunity. My comments Monday, I think, are a reflection of some of that security that's built up, plus the leadership of our presidents and chancellors. When we finally did get together, first of all, they had enough trust in me that we didn't have to meet right away after the Big Ten news related to their expansion, so that we could sort out fact from fiction, and then just talk through what it is we might want and who we are. And what you heard was a security, if you will, in who we are, not a complacency, but a competence in our decision-making last year, our move to 16, and our future as a group of 16. And so, we do things, sure. I've had plenty of phone calls where I could say, let's get after this. I think you have to exercise care and also understand your culture and your philosophy of why you make decisions. There's also a great deal of self-reflection involved, like, did we do the right thing? And a weight that you bear, like, are we making the right decisions now? And whenever I stop that deep self-evaluation, is probably the time to step away, because I will have become complacent or overconfident, and I never want that to be part of the role.
It's interesting. Do you have a list in your head? I just wonder if you have teams that when and if you decided to expand, you would go after. I know you're not going to share the teams with me, but do you have those in your head? Do you think like that?
Well, I think, first of all, there has to be a really good basis for why one would expand. And you don't just expand to go to 18 or to 20 or to 24. You expand for reasons. And I'm one who never thinks that you just put money out there, because that causes you to make bad decisions. Even last year, neither Texas nor Oklahoma called and said, how much money can we make? It was a recognition of how we've made decisions, how we've grown, how our universities have positioned themselves, and how we support athletics, and really a recognition of a consistent philosophy. That's why you grow. And I would just go through those issues to say, if we ever were to expand, you want outstanding universities that attract students from all over the country and all over the world, who support athletics at a high level and have the ability to compete and make leadership contributions within this league. I've talked about geographic continuity and contiguous states, which is a fancy way of saying states that touch ours. But that's a whole lot of the country. That's
Right.
New Mexico to the Carolinas up to Indiana. And so it really comes back to a cultural fit and a philosophical fit.
So we all saw the Nick Saban and Jimbo Fisher thing. We saw that happen, and I'm not going to touch on that. But I was just going to ask you, we have such big personalities in the SEC, especially as coaches. How do you deal with those on a day-to-day basis? How do you rein those in?
Yeah. Couple of thoughts. So I actually joined the SEC staff back in the fall of 2002. So my first spring meeting was May of 2003 in Destin, and I had never been in a meeting of our head football coaches before. Now, I had worked in a small conference office with head coaches, and in fact, like half of our baseball coaches at the time I had worked with. So when I went to our baseball coaches meeting, it was easy. But I remember consciously as I walked into the head football coaching meeting, I was uptight. I'm walking into a room full of millionaires and big personalities. You had Jackie Sherrill, Lou Holtz, Nick Saban, David Cutcliffe, Philip Fulmer. I could kind of go through some of the list. Rich Brooks at Kentucky, Bobby Johnson. Um, I think right around that time, Mike Shula was brand new.
Oh boy!
Now Senator Tuberville. So it was a fascinating experience to just walk into that room, and there were some tense moments that day. So I've had the ability to adjust to that. On the other hand, I have the opportunity uniquely to get to know our head coaches as people. So rather than seeing them behind a microphone or on a stage or on a TV, I get to have conversations about, with Kirby today. I know Mary Beth, his wife. I've gotten to meet his kids. Just talked about where he spends his time. Jimbo and his wife were down at Destin out to dinner. My wife and I were going to dinner, and I talked to him about the foundation he runs to support his son and his really chronic disease and what they've done from a research standpoint to overcome those things. That's what's not seen, that when you have some of the tense moments, you build relationships to help you get through. The moment that I kind of realized what was going on, I was in New York City. It was almost midnight. I was at an event, and you're trying to process your way through that. And I don't think there's a formula for how to deal with something like that. And so it does come back to relationships, to trust mutually. I have a job to do. They have a job to do. And while people will agree, other people will disagree. You try to move forward in your decision making in the most effective way possible.
Commissioner, as far as the time frame of some regulation that we might see on NIL, what are you hopeful for in terms of, in particular, recruiting? That seems to be the one bugaboo that's out there promising money to prospects.
Yeah, very much so. And if you go back to 2019, as we talked about how do we want name, image, and likeness to come on board, there are a set of issues. The very first one was not to have this introduced on a state-by-state basis. That's exactly what we have, because that creates confusion for coaches. It creates confusion for administrators. It creates confusion for young people and their parents as they're trying to figure out, where do I go to college? And that last being the most important point. But that's what we have. We also have legal outcomes and ongoing legal issues that limit the NCAA's ability to just solve that problem. Stated more directly, the NCAA can't pass a rule that puts a state university in conflict with a state law. That's just untenable.
Right.
It's impractical. And so you then look to Congress to enact the national standard so that everyone operates under the same structure. That doesn't mean Congress has to solve all of the problems around college athletics. We've had a common basis for the approach to the scholarship, which has worked for decades. And now we've been informed that may be too limiting. And so to have a national standard, you're going to have congressional action. Between now and the midterm election, I think that's a tough proposition as you start to ask about time. So our focus is on educating, both learning from House and Senate members, but also communicating with them what's happening and the importance of their engagement. And that puts us into the next Congress. So hopefully we'll have some early signals on success when the next Congress is in place. If not, if we're not able to move forward at the federal level, we're going to be back to our states, engaging in conversation with our current 11 states, soon to be 12 states, about a common approach. And I think there are some leaders at the state level willing to enact that legislation, but they also have to oversee that type of legislation. So there's some work to be done. It's not going to be an immediate hit the easy button and we solve it in 30 days. And so there's going to be some stress involved. How's that for a simple analysis?
So it sounds like you're telling me that any NIL legislation, though, is a couple of years away.
It doesn't have to be a couple of years, but yep, that's possible.
Right.
We said in our meetings, one of our presidents said, there's going to be more discomfort before there's a solution that emerges. So there's at least a game plan. There are people who care and are interested. The issue is going to be, is there a commitment to resolve the issues that exist at present?
You were incredibly smooth on my first question. If you had a team in your head, do you have a team in your head? And so I can just start throwing out teams. You can tell me yay or nay if that's a team. Does that work for you?
I'm pretty good at a poker face, so
I noticed that.
I won't play that game.
Okay.
There are realities around existing commitments that institutions have to their conferences. That's their responsibility, not mine. I have a responsibility to respect those agreements. So I'll just sit back and listen to your list as opposed to engage.
Yeah, I didn't think if I start listing out schools, you're going to. Do you think we'll see any more movement by any of the major conferences before this football season? Any announcement?
My opinion likely does not matter because
Sure.
they're not going to call me and ask me should I or should I not. The potential's there. It certainly is. And when I speak of wanting to be attentive to the landscape, we will be attentive to the landscape and how things develop. We have 7 weekends, I think, before the season.
Mm-hmm.
6 for Vanderbilt since they play on week 0. That's a pretty tight time frame. And some of these discussions have just erupted after the Big Ten announcement. So, yeah, it could. I don't expect that to be us. But we're going to be attentive and we'll be nimble, but we're also going to be thoughtful about the cultural issues and the support and expectation issues. And we're not going to diminish who we are just to reach a number.
I know that there's a lot going on. I just want to tell you should be very proud of the job you've done. I think that goes back about 3 commissioners, quite frankly. And each of you have brought something different to the table. What you brought is, I think, a forward-thinking mindset, and it's been fascinating to watch you work. So
it's I first, and I'm supposed to hurry up on my time list, but the first time I ever visited the SEC office, it was at the invitation of Roy Kramer, and I was commissioner of the Southland Conference, and it was 1998. And I remember vividly walking into the commissioner's office like, this is a big deal. And I remember with Mike Slive one time, he asked me to sit in his chair and type an email. I'm like, wow, I'm sitting in the chair of the commissioner of the Southeastern Conference. And that moment, like probably in 2004, was a big deal. And so to walk in that office every day and know both of them as friends, but then study the history. Harvey Schiller before it was a short time, but Boyd McWhorter's impact on our league. Each of us, me with Mike, Roy, and everybody back, Mike with Roy, and those back, we all stand on the shoulders of each other, if you will. And one of the great joys for me is to be able to pick up the phone and reach out to Roy at his home in Maryville and just have a conversation, which are always fascinating and informative. And the loss of Mike is one that still hurts because of the relationship he and I had. But I benefit from their work every day. And hopefully, if I do this really well, somebody will say similar kind things about me out there in the future.
You're crushing it. You're doing a great job, Commissioner.
Thank you.
We appreciate it. You don't need my endorsement, but it does mean a lot to a lot of people that you've done such a great job as a steward of SEC football. So thank you very much for your time. We appreciate it. Have a great rest of the day.
Thank you.
Great stuff from Greg Sankey, SEC Commissioner. More after this, Off the Hook Sports, as we're live from SEC Media.